I'm Ron Donaire, CEO of Intuizi, and I have with me today David Young. He's the CEO of Goal Aligned Media and author of A Short Guide to Marketing Model Alignment and Design, a book that takes a look at the logic of marketing and the design of statistical models to improve accuracy and profits. David, welcome to the Data Deep Dive.
Thanks, Ron. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're working on this year?
Okay, so today we're working on some meta-analysis for paid search. So Google is great in that it provides all these free tools for optimizing your search, and they've done a really good job at making a system that can be used by almost anyone and in almost any situation. But anything that's made to use by anyone in any situation sometimes goes awry. Mm-hmm. And that's where we can come in and kind of nudge it in the right direction to kind of focus in on better profits.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, any type of modeling or any type of generic software will do a lot of things okay, but you need to make sure to be doing better than okay in business. You need to be able to excel. So that makes a lot of sense. So marketing and statistical concepts are kind of like the cornerstones of modeling. Can you talk a little bit about how you do that, and maybe specifically how you select certain dependent variables to help maximize goals?
Sure. So I think actually selecting the dependent variable is probably the most underrated part of modeling. Modelers, they'll spend, days or sometimes weeks or months building a model to, predict this dependent variable as accurately as they can. And the definition of the thing they're spending those weeks and months to predict sometimes is made rather haphazardly. It could just be handed down from another manager or they tend to think of it as the modelers tend to think of it as not their job. That's the business person's job. I'll just take this and kind of do it. And that can really leave a lot of money on the table. Mm-hmm. So I'll just kind of translate it back to paid search for a moment. So what Google Smart Bidding, any kind of paid search optimization does is it uses sales that track using cookies to paid links. That's the dependent variable. So it's that subset of sales that have linked using a cookie to the link. Mm-hmm. And that's pretty good. It sounds pretty good off the first look at it, but then when you start to think about it, there's a lot of issues that can go wrong with that. So like one is that it's only using what was tracked with cookies. Mm-hmm. So if cookies are kind of being more and more erased more and more quickly, then it's going to lose everything that happened early in the sales funnel. Yep. And so that's all going to look like a kind of a loss or a failure of the media. Mm-hmm. And anything that's really close to the sale at the bottom is going to look like a win. And it can lead to big problems with, just focusing on things that maybe were going to happen anyway. Mm-hmm. So like they've already typed your name into Google and then you give them a link and sure enough, they come and make a purchase, but you didn't change the incremental situation much by giving them a link to what they were already going to find. Yeah. You've just connected it to the paid media.
Yeah, it's like incremental lift is the important thing that you're always looking at, right? If someone's already going to search for you in Google or whatever search engine that they use, that's gonna happen. You've already made that sale. Attributing it to something else actually can lead to bad data, and that's kind of like one of the interesting aspects of modeling, especially in this particular space, is kind of ensuring the quality of data, because like the quality of data is basically the precursor to what the consistency and quality of model that you produce as an output. This is a good time to talk about maybe how you work with imperfect data. You just described a situation in which you can maybe incorrectly prescribe a result to something based on bad data. Can you kind of talk about kind of how you work with that imperfect data, how you kind of address those issues?
Sure. So I'm just going to stay with the paid search theme for most of the conversation. So one area where you could have inaccurate data is when you're defining that dependent variable with your sales. You could say, well, any sale counts, or you could say, well, some sales count more than others.
Mhm.
So this sale was, a really big volume purchase that counts for a lot. And this other one was just a tiny one, so that doesn't count very much. And there's a trade-off there. It's so if you use the big purchase counts for a lot, then you're making very few data points count for all the credit. And if you go the other direction, then you might get more data, but then you're discounting the idea that one was worth 10 times or 100 times the other one. So it's not obvious. It depends on the situation. It's not obvious where you're going to be better off, and you just have to test that. Sometimes you can win big by using a value-weighted conversion metric, and other times you're better off with getting more data and having it not be so sparse. And that's an option you've got in Google. You can use value-weighted conversion metrics, and it's generally a good idea to use some kind of value weight. But if you go all the way to what happens with some companies where I've sold the jet, I'm only going to sell 50 jets this year. Or you could go down to well, here's some leads, they're not big, $5 million sales, but, I've got hundreds of those and I've only got 50 sales for the year. So it's really a trade-off that you have to make, and you have to test for and see what's working best. So that's one example of how you can use, bad data. Another example would be, let's say on the incrementality, you could use a way to look at things that were, you could use A/B tests to then evaluate, what's the real incremental impact of this type of media. And then you could go back into Google and either use a variety of the tools that they have at your disposal. You can have plus or minus bids on different types of keywords. You could use the value-weighted conversion metric again, and you can have budgets that are pooled or not pooled across different things. You might not want to pool in together, say, branded searches with non-branded searches. That might be, a bad idea to let that trade off. Sure. So there's a lot of things you can do, and it boils down to restrictions where you can and get an advantage, or you might not.
Gotcha. No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Going back to the concept of incrementality, your example of big ticket items, or kind of on the other side of the spectrum, multiple leads. It all comes back down to like a lifetime value of a customer, right? It comes back to the total value that they present over time. So if I'm maybe on the consumer side, like a shop owner, and I'm looking at total basket size. Well, the basket size of a big customer could be maybe a few $100, but they don't shop very often. They buy everything at once. But someone who comes in and buys incrementally every single month could have a longer lifetime value, and actually in the long run be a more valuable customer to the business, even though each transaction is smaller. So that's an example of where weighted values of individual transactions aren't necessarily always indicative of total value to the business, which is interesting. So one of the things that you mentioned is cookies being cleared and things of that nature. Other reasons kind of come into play when it comes to cookies being either erased or deleted, or even present, because privacy is extremely important. Everybody's talking about it right now. There's legislations in California that have already been enacted. New York has a pretty stringent one. There's GDPR in the EU. So privacy is at the forefront of everything that's ad driven right now. Cookies are getting deprecated. And even tracking on mobile apps, like the iOS frameworks are deprecating IDFA, which kind of decimated Facebook's revenue. How do you guide your clients to navigate all of that, given that there's so much change going on?
Well, it's a good question. The truth is that the debate about how to estimate the value of media has been on for, as long as I've been looking at media. And the digital attribution versus, like, say, a media mix model attribution, I mean, that's been a big debate as well for at least 15 years. So now that, and I don't think there was a clear winner. I mean, I think they both had and still have advantages. So I'll just throw those two things out because that's where some of the answer is going to go. So a media mix model is essentially looking at sales over time versus expenditures over time. And to the extent that your expenditures seem to correlate with increasing revenue bumps, then it would attribute, like, well, you spend a bunch on TV here, sales seems to always go up after he does that. That must be, the reason. So it uses that kind of logic. And then the digital media, or the digital attribution, it's really more of a tracking where, this person clicked on this thing and then they made the purchase. So we're going to count that as a win. So they both have their pluses and their flaws. On the flaw side, I'll say that the mixed models, they just can't get granular. There's just not enough information to go to that granular level. So it's always been true that you needed the digital tracking to get granular, outcome. If you want to know what's happening by hour, what's happening today versus yesterday, the only place was digital tracking. On the other hand, the flaw of the digital tracking is that it's not looking at incrementality, it's looking at tracking. So if you have someone who, say, gets a direct mail piece, sees a TV ad, and then goes online and types into Google, whatever it is the product is, and then they click the link and they go and they make a purchase. Mm-hmm. Tracking would say, well, Google won, that tracked to Google. And TV would say, hey, that tracked to mine. And direct mail will say, well, that tracked to mine too. So they all count it, and it can't be everybody's, or it could be everyone contributed, right? But they all shouldn't all get full credit, but they all give themselves full credit because they're all isolated tracking mechanisms. And the digital attribution, by the name digital, you can just tell that it was tracking nothing to anything that wasn't digital. So those have a lot of problems. I mean, so if you think about what causes sales, I'll say that, like, how about a price change? Price is down. Well, that's going to get more sales, but nothing tracks to that, right? So you know from the get-go that can't be true, right? You can't give all the credit to media if you just lower the price, or if you just opened a new store, so distribution got bigger, or all kinds of things that can impact sales just aren't included. So from my perspective, then, to your pertinent question of what are you going to do when all that stuff gets erased, we've got to lean more heavily on these other methodologies, A/B tests or mixed models or something like that, which maybe should have always leaned on some anyway, to get the right answers.
Yeah, with digital, we all got so enamored with the deterministic nature, right? Like,
right.
Everybody wants to just know a simple answer of, like, oh, I did this and it caused more sales, and thus we need to do more of A, because if we get more of A, we get more sales, and thus we keep going. But in reality, that answer is more nuanced than that, right? Media mix modeling has been around for a very long time, and for a very strong reason is that it's very hard to measure exact correlations when there's so many contributing factors. One of our clients is a ice cream shop that is that's national, and guess what? No matter what you're trying to do, because you're in Virginia, if you try and sell ice cream right now in winter, you're gonna sell less of it, just by the nature of what the weather is, right? Like, and that has nothing to do with the effectiveness of your media, but everything to do with the effectiveness of what's happening in the real world, right? Yeah. So like in Intuizi, we measure things that happen in real time in the real world to real people, and that's kind of like the premise of our business is you start looking at actual effects of things outside of the scope of just digital attribution. Because as you very astutely mentioned, digital is digital, right? Like it's all relegated to one thing, on your phone, on your tablet, on your desktop. And it doesn't really look at all the other aspects of what's happening out in the world. But thank you so much for your time today. It's been super informative. If somebody wanted to get in contact with you, David, what would be the best way of doing so?
Well, they could reach out directly with an email. So my email is dyoung@goalalignedmedia.com, or you could go to the website and there's a form there, and we'd get back to you right away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. That's a wrap. Join us again next week for another informative session on Intuizi's The Data Deep Dive.
Thank you.